First of all, in your packets, which are in the Heritage tote bags, there's a folder. In that folder, on the left-hand side, there are notices about books and projects and exhibitions. And part of what we take incredibly seriously is calling those projects out, even if it's an idea and it may not happen or ends up happening a different way. So many projects have been, born and fertilized, to use the off-color metaphor, in this room, that we take this very seriously, and we want to let people know about what you're doing or what you have done or what your colleagues are doing. On the right-hand side, there is one document that is, if you will, suggestions for further reading. We don't have everyone, but we've got a hell of a lot of them, and it's organized in the order in which people are presenting or panels are presenting. And of course, there's always going to be further information, so we will find a way to get some of that out to you afterwards. There is also a document that is rather clumsily titled Précis, but also organized in the order of presentation. And by and large, those are short summaries. They can be an aide-mémoire or a place to take notes or what have you. I have frighteningly learned that there are people who have actually a folder of every year. So besides me, who is obviously a little bit neurotic about the subject. So we are here in the House of Heritage, which is fantastic. We are so grateful for their commitment to American art and to us, which should not go unremarked. And I do want to mention to you that there will be lunch again. There may be a little hiccup of time, a slip twixt the cup and the lip of when one thing goes and the other thing comes in, but that is happening. I want to take a moment to point out this sponsor list. And one of the reasons I want to do it, I won't take as much time as yesterday, but we cherish every one of these relationships. We have very engaged conversations with everyone or every entity that is mentioned on this list. And we are here to, and hopefully have been for 30 years, but to really build and stand with everyone else who is committed to American art. And to go in expanding horizons, but the field is always growing, always changing. And one of the things or a couple things we're committed to are cutting across, if you will, preconceived or accepted categories, be it time, be it of medium, even of nomenclature. And so those are commitments we take really seriously, and we are honored to be supported by this group of entities. And in particular, I want to mention the O'Brien Art Foundation, which really made so much possible, because it's amazing what a challenge grant does. It helps to elicit support from other people, and we want you. This is me flashing my ankle shamelessly. We want you. This is a campaign. I am Rosie the Riveter for 2026, and my cause is American art. So, a couple of things to say. We have a wonderful relationship with American Fine Art Magazine, for which we are extremely grateful. And all of you have copies of the magazine in your bag with a nice article and such. And American Fine Art is I'm going to just read you their text. As a special thank you to you as an attendee, you're invited to enjoy a 6-month print and digital subscription to American Fine Art Magazine. Simply enter the promo code Boundless26 and this is written, it's out there on the book table. So I'm not going to give you the line, but it gives you what to enter. And we will, in one of our follow-up emails, remind you all of this. But I did want to call this out. I also wanted to call out something that's not in your packets, but something that we are very committed to. So yesterday we had Ann Helmreich and talking about the criticality of the Archives of American Art and the resources that the Archives has. One, we're thrilled to be refreshing, renewing, enlivening our relationship with the Archives, which is really important. At the same time, I want to call out another project that I think is really important, and it's called artifactsmovie.com, and it is artifactsmovie.com and artifactsmovie.movie. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to get that tattooed up here, and I have no tattoos, so trust me, that's a real commitment. But it is the product of Stephen Watson's commitment to documenting avant-garde movements of any stripe, if you will, over the past 30 years. And 2 years ago, I was able to get him to preview, if you will, something that is now live, which is an interview with Beatrice Wood. So those of you who are terrifically interested in that period, the period covered by his, I'm going to put in a plug for your book, amazing book, Strange Bedfellows. Please have a listen. And like everyone else, although of an exceptional nature, Artifacts Movie, sorry for getting the period wrong, is also looking for support. So, we stand by everybody who's doing great things. So, okay, so what's happening today? So we are living in, I'm going to use the word challenging. And by that, I don't want to say, oh my gosh, things are just awful times, but really challenging times where everybody is kind of put on notice, at least this is my take, to do their best, to stand up for what they believe in. And it is a time in which materiality matters. And by materiality, I, yes, mean every single thing that you're looking at, but in particular, what one might call artistic or cultural expressions and manifestations. We don't live in a period where you can, stereotypically say, half the people don't care and they're idiots, and, then there are people who do care. Everybody cares. They may not care the way you care. In other words, the point of view may not be your point of view, but everybody cares. That was perhaps an overstatement. Let's say 95% of the people care. But some of the people that you probably least want to think about, or at least some of us least want to think about, boy, oh boy, does architectural style matter to them. Boy, oh boy, does sculptural style and expression and subject matter to them. This is something that is incredibly important to remember. And equally important to remember is that instead of just saying, oh my gosh, NEH has been decimated by these idiots. What are we going to do creatively to come up with short-term solutions to keep going and long-term different approaches and perspectives? And one allusion I want to make from yesterday to today was actually Kathy Foster's talk about the PMA Path of Middleton collaboration, because that's an instance where you have three entities banding together to do something that is quite extraordinary. And, much of those are resources within the possession of each of them. But to think creatively and strategically about coming together, because in my world, 1 + 1 is 4. So we are starting today with a wonderful conversation, fulfilling purpose in the face of heightened challenges, funding, oversight, and infrastructure. And that is not meant to delimit, just suggest. And I am super glad that not only did Bob Cozzolino and I sort of birth this in very challenging phone calls in which he always challenges one to do better, but he agreed to moderate it. And on this panel, Randy Griffey, who is now head of the American Art Program for the Luce, so he is back in New York, lucky us. Excuse me, I'm having a little trouble here. Asma Naeem, who is the director of the Baltimore Museum of Art, and Jamie Powell, who is here from Dartmouth, and who, please read her bio, because she is here as a representative also of a tribe of which she is a member, and as somebody who works on the curation of and the teaching of, I'm going to say, the history of the United States from a really distinct and important perspective. I hope I did that elegantly. At any rate, so I'm going to vamoose, and they are going to come up and, as always, please know, questions, comments, all encouraged. And this is as close as we could get to a double shot to open the day.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. We're going to fulfill Lisa's promise of you getting a double shot. So thank you so much, Heritage and Lisa and Aaron and everybody that puts together this conference. And I also want to give a warm welcome to Asma and Randy and Jamie for being here. I'm just going to launch into a little framing before we have our conversation. Staff at museums have endured numerous challenges over the past several years. COVID-19, nationwide social justice reckonings, and an intense backlash against speaking history's truths has required museum workers across fields to be collaborative, show humility, and consider new ways to meet audience needs. I thought this would be a good time, and I'm welcoming, I really want this, I crave this kind of conversation with my colleagues to discuss how we continue to do our work and do work that expresses our values in the current cultural climate. What strategies are museum workers taking to integrate communities into program and interpretation in meaningful ways? how are museums navigating programmatic and exhibition support with the loss of the NEA and the NEH? What is at stake when underrepresented voices and truth-telling are silenced and attacked? We have been here before in the late 1980s, just to name one episode, in the late 1980s, which witnessed major efforts to censor and suppress art about the AIDS crisis, feminism, and fluid identities. So one of the things I hope we'll talk about is how can we support one another and artists, which is why we're here. We're all here because of artists in the field in times of crisis. So on the screen, you have just some sort of images to sort of ponder while we're talking. A couple of them are specific to our speakers. So on the left, Amy Sherald's Transforming Liberty from 2024, which is a portrait of a model, the person who modeled for Amy Sherald is Arawa Basit. And on the right is a photograph by Caro Romero called, it's titled Arla Lucia from 2020, and it is the model is Arla Marquez. And Jamie did a Caro Romero show that took place at the very beginning of 2025 through, well, maybe the whole year. I can't remember how long the tour was. So in 2025, the Caro Romero exhibition was implemented. There was programming around it, community interaction, and that's when so much of the ramping up of the current administration was going on with various executive orders, the gutting of the NEA and NEH, which I know personally I have relied on for shows that would not happen otherwise, and programming and community support that would not have happened at museums I worked with otherwise. So I'm curious how that's impacted that show. And of course, Ozma, very quickly, as museum director at the Baltimore Museum of Art, was able to move Amy Sherald's show to the Baltimore Museum when there was a threat of that particular painting being censored in Washington, D.C. And so reacting right to that moment and supporting an artist and giving a community perhaps what it needed. So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about with these groups of people. And also, ever since 2016, when I moved from Philadelphia to Minneapolis, many of these things in general have been top of mind as a person working at a museum, also in the ecosystem of the art world. And at the beginning of this year, you saw what Minneapolis did in order to sort of stand up for neighbors. And street art was integral to that, as were many other kinds of issues of mutual support. So this idea of mutual care and mutual support in the art world at this moment is one of those things that I think I hope we'll talk about. So I'll start off with just asking all of you to speak to one of the questions that I have in my mind, which is how is the current denial of history that's been happening affected your work and how you interact with your communities, and what kind of feedback are you getting from your communities and artists while we're seeing these kinds of denials of history happening? Because all of your work has been really integral to supporting underrepresented people and integrating them into the whole mainstream art canon. So how are you navigating that in your various roles as a director, as a curator, and now as somebody who has been a curator but is representing a major funder for supporting all kinds of American art initiatives? There's a softball.
I feel like a softball might have been world peace in this moment. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jamie Powell. As Lisa alluded to, I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation, and I serve as the Associate Director for Curatorial Affairs and Curator of Indigenous Art at the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth College. Being at an academic museum at a private institution has really afforded us a lot of flexibility in this moment. And, academic integrity is something that is important at our institution, and academic freedom. Whether or not I agree with, all of kind of the leadership choices being made at different areas of of the government and the institution I work with right now, you know, knowing that as long as we're presenting veracity in the work that we present, the truth is the truth, and that has been supported at the institution I work in. It also helps that, you know, we're free and open to the public, and so we're not kind of relying on, you know, people coming. It's a good thing because we're in the middle of nowhere, New Hampshire, so we're not relying on, you know, people to come in and see the shows. But right now we do have a suite of exhibitions on view that are in recognition of 2026, and, you know, kind of thinking about, you know, in this moment, you know, we've been planning it for several years. And we asked a lot of questions, you know, after the past election. Do we want to do a 250th show? And then, you know, when there were the calls to say, okay, if you're receiving grants from the NEA or the NEH, you have to agree to do certain things. We were not in a position where we were going to do that. And, you know, we said we're still going to do these shows because they're important, and we're showing familiar favorites, but we're also placing them alongside works that urge people to ask questions they might not otherwise ask. So for instance, without kind of explicitly telling people what they're supposed to think. I think that's also this moment of frustration that a lot of people, you know, in mainstream society are struggling with, is nobody wants to be told what they're supposed to think. You know, we should be able to think for ourselves. And that goes for, you know, our time we spend in museums. Most people go to museums in their free time. They spend resources and money and want to create this experience for them and their families to have, you know, in the best of worlds, a transformational experience. That's like what we want to do. We want to change people's lives or help them think differently or see something in a new light. And so really focusing on allowing the artists to tell those stories. So right now we have a painting on view you may know of, Ed Ruscha's Standard Station from 1963. But in the same gallery, there's a painting by Dene or Navajo painter Tony Abeda that is about the protest against the Dakota Access Pipelines in Standing Rock. And so alongside this painting that is depicting, you know, the standardization of, you know, gas stations and is American, you know, really kind of an icon of American pop art, you have a Native American artist whose community has been impacted. His Navajo community has been impacted by extractive industry, specifically uranium mining, but also was one of the people who responded to the call and went out and fought for the sovereignty and rights of people at Standing Rock to have safe, clean drinking water, but also to uphold the treaty rights that the United States government agreed to with their nation. And so there's all these layers of complexity that you can present people with. And so like when you give tours, you can talk a little bit more. When I'm teaching classes, I definitely speak about certain things that I don't talk about with the general public, depending on what they're reading. But it really is kind of just a lot more work right now thinking about, well, how might this be received? What do we need to be able to respond to? But at the end of the day, for me, it's still, if we're telling the truth and we're welcoming to everyone, then that is the baseline of what I'm comfortable doing and where, you know, kind of my own sense of accountability is still in this moment able to align with the role that I have. But I know that's not the case for some people.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm feeling a split personality emerging, Bob, based on, in response to your question and just my own recent professional transition from having been a curator, specifically most recently 3+ years at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where I was head curator and not exactly front row seat to everything that was going on, but like wasn't in the nosebleeds either. And now as the program head at Henry Luce Foundation, so have moved into an adjacent industry, I guess. So I'm trying to figure the right way to answer your question, and I'm thinking of multiple ways. Do you have a preference?
Just be yourself.
No, it's
Your
be myself.
No.
Okay.
Well, here I'll ask one side of the head.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess one of the things I'm curious about with you is, you have done really forward-thinking scholarship in American art. You've been thoughtful about how to show empathy to the artists that you've worked on, like Hartley, for instance. And you were just in DC. So now that you're aware of how the ecosystem is responding to these challenges, do you, and maybe you can't answer this, I don't know, but as you've moved to the Luce, which we all really feel like is really the lifeblood with the Terra, real strong supporters, major supporters of all of our projects. Are you able to be nimble and responsive to things that are happening in order to fill gaps that are sort of starting to form? Because, is the Luce able to sort of think about, well, if there's the absence of these kinds of supports, what can we do in order to not be the superhero, but maybe shore up some of this? Are you able to sort of think through some of those problems in the moment and shift how the Luce responds?
We're doing our best. The need we're experiencing is overwhelming. We have limited, finite resources, and now not only the federal revocation of funds, now Ford is withdrawing from arts initiatives, visual arts initiatives, as far as I can recognize. So as recently as yesterday, I got another message from a small museum here in New York, coincidentally, had just received a message that their Ford funding was going away, and if I had any discretionary funding by the end of the year, could we swoop in and be the superhero? And those messages are going to become more and more common. And it will become another layer of our work. But with the level of demand, being nimble becomes more of a challenge. Part of my, now that I'm 5 months in, now that I have opened, just dozens and dozens and dozens of conversations. And I have to say, one of the many wonderful things about this new gig is just the way that my professional network has blossomed, because I'm meeting people and becoming aware of arts organizations and museums that I didn't even know existed. So that's very wonderful for me. But one thing I tell everyone I talk to, given the circumstances we're in, that early conversations are critical, especially if significant asks are being considered, because the planning to plot and strategically deploy our limited resources, that's essential. So early conversations are critical. I can tell that Ozma is taking notes here next to me. And if all of you are now, I got 2 solicitations just on my way in. Anyway, yeah, so I'm more popular than ever. Anyway, but I get it. No harm, no harm, no foul. But in all seriousness, being nimble is, I think is going to be increasingly difficult to that point.
Yeah. I have some follow-ups, but let's see. I want to hear what Esmond. Well, one of the things is, knowing your history as a curator, I mean, I imagine one of the things that you bring into the role, and Terry probably did this too, but Terry started at different times. I mean, there's always this underlying need, but Terry Coburn I'm talking about, who is also a curator of American art before she headed. So you bring a sensitivity to understanding what curators need and also what your colleagues at museums need, what the whole ecosystem of the museum relies on in order to work together to support public work. And so I guess as you have moved into this role, are there things that you've wondered about with regard to what a funder like the Luce can do that now you're bringing into it with that kind of consciousness, and you're saying, I know what some of the unique needs of a curator might be, or what the things that usually do not get funded in an exhibition are the first things to get cut, often public programming, or some kind of community involvement. Are you sort of thinking about how the Luce might serve those more sensitively from your position, having been in the museum world for so long like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it relates to a chat I was having a bit earlier over coffee and juice, which is just out of the conversations I'm having, just of course, draw out the great personal, institutional insecurity that's professional insecurity that's out in the world too, which just also I have not only thoughts about curatorial needs, but needs around professional development. And I'm not thinking so much, Luce has a long-standing relationship with the ACLS for the dissertation fellowships for American art. And so I'm not thinking about adding to those to contribute to a glut of aspiring PhDs right now, because the market hasn't grown incommensurate with the pipelines for that kind of growth. But what else, of course, gets cut is junior staff at museums. So while we're not in a position to endow permanent positions, of course, there are loose-funded, termed curatorial positions at institutions throughout the country that have capacity for mentorship. And so we are looking for opportunities where there's need and desire to extend those, plant new ones if they are needed and wanted, but also not necessarily curatorial fellowships. We have had a fellow at the Black Trustees Alliance that we are doing a phase 2. That's just one example. So I guess in broad strokes, art remains mission critical, but where we are now, the investing in people is right there. We can, again, provide termed positions so that mission critical work continues, and that junior aspiring arts professionals have a little more security for a little bit longer, and then have a little bit longer off-ramp for whatever comes next.
Good morning. I would like to first thank you, Bob, for reaching out to me and also for your long-standing superb scholarship and curatorial work. I'm honored to be with the co-panelists, whom I respect very much, and honestly to see so many familiar faces. I wrote my dissertation on Winslow Homer, Thomas Eakins, and Thomas Wilmer Dewing, so I consider myself an Americanist always. So it's very nice to see some Homer sketches over there. So yay, American art. I will also say, just speaking to some of the comments that Randy and Jamie have been talking about, just the diversity. I was one of the first South Asians to be in, I feel, the American art field, writing about the kinds of artists I was writing about. And I'm still 20 years later seeing how that is not changing. And so I encourage all of you, and there's very esteemed professors and art historians here to continue to think about how American art needs to be redefined. The Whitney Museum is in the biennial, including a new definition of American art, which is American imperialism, with some of the artists in the biennial. I'm going to talk from a very broad perspective. As a museum director, I've been at the Baltimore Museum of Art first as chief curator and now as director for a total of 9 years. I was at the National Portrait Gallery before that for 4 years. The museum field is in an existential crisis, period. Museums are losing relevancy because of the personal computers that we all have attached to our hip, as well as, and that is, an epistemological or existential crisis, yes, but it's also, I think, affecting the people who come to the museums and fighting for their attention. And really, attention is the critical word here. From a financial point of view, I've lost both state and municipal funding in double digits in terms of percentages for my annual operating budget, not to mention NEA and NEH funding that we have usually relied on. Also, individual giving, which is the substantial bucket from which we generate earned revenue and giving, has declined because the generations that gave and believed in philanthropy and civic engagement are aging, and the new wealth generations, the newer generations of wealth, I should say, are not as invested in institutions. So making that argument that we are a compelling cause is hard. So yes, Randy, I was taking notes. At the same time, yes, and I will say what that means for me is how can I move the needle, and to what you were saying, Jamie, continue to advance programming and content and scholarship that is focused on veracity, but also make sure that I'm being superbly strategic in terms of garnering funding for that. That means that I go to the curatorials, the curators, and say, if you can't find funding for this, if I can't help you find funding for this, then we're not going to do this show, period. And it's been a challenge. There's been some shows that we've had to postpone, and we may never bring them back onto the exhibition calendar because we can't get funding. I am looking more than ever to foundations. The reason that we were able to bring Amy Sherald American Sublime from my former home institution, the National Portrait Gallery, to the Baltimore Museum of Art was because of foundations. There were 3 foundations whom I was able to pick up the phone immediately as soon as that New York Times alert came out that said Amy Sherald is canceling her Portrait Gallery exhibition. I reached out immediately, first to Amy, because it is about the artist. It is absolutely about the artist. And I will just say this before I go on to my funding anecdote. Amy Sherald has given a face to how artists can protest and fight the administration. She has single-handedly given the United States and the international art world a way to see how artists can stand up to the administration. Who else has? Who else has? It's only been Amy Sherald. So she is, to me, an incredible leader in this conversation. But so after I talked with Amy, I then called 3 foundations. I didn't call Luz because I know of the limited capacities, and also there was a lot of transition going on, and Terry's been a great advocate. But I called the Mellon, Darren at Ford, so Elizabeth Alexander at the Mellon, Darren Walker at Ford, and then Sharon Corwin at Terra. And their ability to pivot that quickly and give us discretionary funds was integral to this going forward. Only with those funds in hand did I then go to my board and say, this is what's on the table. This is the funding I have. We can do this exhibition. And then we began the conversation about risk analysis and what was at stake, what the administration would do in terms of retaliation, how to hire attorneys from Washington, D.C., defending other nonprofits who were in danger of having their nonprofit status revoked or analyzed in litigation by the administration. Only then were we able to begin that conversation. But the funding is critical and part of the risk analysis. But all of this is led by the artist, to your point, Bob.
Thank you. So I want to follow up a little bit with you. Jamie touched on this a bit, but I went to the new museum the other day, and a former curatorial assistant is now the head of education. So I was meeting with her and asking her how the transition went to the new building, and was standing in this very noisy, very kinetic exhibition that they have on. And one of the things she was talking about that was her initiative, or one of the initiatives she started while the museum was closed and is trying to shift, is that the new museum thinks of itself, or had thought of itself, as really this experimental but international place for showing cutting edge art. And to the maybe detriment of not really paying attention to its neighborhood and who's in its backyard, and what audience in that backyard either has no relationship to the museum and needs to come in, or can be shown that it is a welcoming place and there's things for them there. So she's really working to cultivate the neighborhood as an audience around the new museum, rather than thinking always of an international art audience that is coming from hither and yon and then leaving. And so, at the Minneapolis Institute, Jill Elberg-Yo and I and other people, we're always trying to sort of talk about how our repeat visitors are going to be right there in our backyard, in our neighborhood of Whittier, or in other places in the Twin Cities. And we really need to pay a great deal of attention to them, even though we want to attract, we wanted to attract, in theory, hundreds of thousands of people every year that were coming in and out of the Twin Cities. So every single big museum that is in a city or mid-sized city or large city has a neighborhood, and also has a community that has very particular needs. On a campus, you have a particular audience and a particular kind of culture that's around it in the service that you do to particular kinds of visitors. But in Baltimore, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what's unique about Baltimore to you, having been there for a while now. And was there something in what you recognize about the place that also made it seem that it was perfect for Amy's show to come there? I mean, are there things you're thinking about in terms of, now that we maybe are not going to rely on Washington funding, what are we doing more to cultivate where we are and maybe build back bridges that are previous neglected sort of areas of that ecosystem, that immediately local place to the big museum?
So I think the work that you did in Minneapolis is a model for many of us. And we have a colleague of yours from Minneapolis as our Chief Education Officer, Elizabeth Callahan, who is continuing to be incredibly thoughtful and analytical at the same time of our communities and audiences. So Baltimore City has been a historically Black city. It's 65% Black. Many folks came to Baltimore during the Great Migration, but what we're seeing right now is a turnover with their grandchildren of the Great Migration generation moving out to the counties, and the new immigration patterns are coming from Hispanic populations, Latinx communities, and I will say that my purview in the next chapter for the Baltimore Museum of Art is really one of survival. So I'm not just thinking about the city. I am thinking about the city, but I'm also thinking about the state of Maryland as well as the region. We had, with Amy Sherald, a perfect perfect storm sounds negative. So I'm going to say a unicorn of a situation. That sounds positive. Because Amy spent time in Baltimore. Baltimore was her second hometown. She went to Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA. She spent half of her career in Maryland. Half of the sitters in the exhibition are Baltimore subjects. And so there was a clear nexus of why Amy's show should come to Baltimore. Our most attended exhibition up until that date, up until the opening of Amy Sherrill, American Sublime, was 45,000 folks for Matisse Stephencorn, and then 42,000 folks for the culture, hip hop, and contemporary art in the 21st century. Amy Sherrill was 90,000 visitors. Yes, yes. People came from all over. We opened up the museum another day to have 9,000 school children come and see the exhibition, which was absolutely just heartwarming. But I will say it made us realize that there is a desire to come to museums if the content is right. And that's what your question is getting at, thinking of our communities. And so what we realized was, here's not only a hometown girl in a way, but here is a subject matter of portraiture, which, I mean, yes, Amy's works are portraiture, but they're really not portraiture, they're fictions, but also of Black folks seeing themselves on museum walls. That really made an outpouring of support. But I will also say, and I know, Jamie, you want to chime in, the ways in which we think about how Amy's art making appeals to a broad swath of the American public, beyond the Black joy and identity that she's exploring is very unique. And so as we think about communities and engagement, we're trying to find that unicorn again. But I think the short answer is thinking about how popular culture, more vernacular ways of thinking of art today, as well as seeing yourself on the walls, can combine to create the right exhibition. So go ahead, Jamie, sorry.
Oh, no, I just wanted to kind of pick up on this thread of the importance of being able to see yourself in these spaces. And so I grew up, I'm actually, oh, hi, Sylvia. Sylvia Yount from the Met is here. The first time I went to the Met was actually not to go into the galleries. I was in grad school, and I went to see a ribbon work suit, so some regalia that a male dancer would wear in our dances in Oklahoma, that my great grandmother had made, that was collected by Ted Coe, and part of his gift to the Met. And so I walked past the gallery, and I also brought my mom and my aunt and my cousin, because that's how Native people do things. We always bring people with us and have too much food. But the reason that I didn't go to museums like that when I was growing up was, one, a cost thing. But my mom was an avid library goer. She read a lot, and found out, I think after my brother and I had been playing too loudly in the library as kids, that you could get free tickets to museums through the library programs. So we did that a lot. But I never saw Native Americans in art museums, or when I did, it was always old historic figures, and that's not what we dress like today. And so I even would have friends growing up who said, well, you're not a real Indian because you don't, wear your hair in braids, or you don't live in a teepee, you don't have a, raccoon that you can talk to. So that important, for me, becoming a curator was actually motivated by the fact that I could see when I was, I'm trained as a sociocultural anthropologist, not an art historian. So my background is actually working at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, and these places where I, as a kid growing up, but also as a young adult, could see kids coming in and being excited and being like, I want to be a paleontologist when I grow up. I want to be an archaeologist. I want to see myself doing these things. And for the most part, when you go in, especially in a lot of American installations, I like to make this joke that you see just like a bunch of white guys on horses, which is great. You know, they're great paintings, but most of us don't see ourselves in those paintings and see that we can inhabit these places. And so there's this tie, and I'm glad you picked these two images, because I think both Amy and Kara do this in their work. They enable our communities to see ourselves in the images, but there's something that they're also doing which isn't this kind of like reversal of the status quo where people who aren't part of those communities come in and feel like they don't have a place in those images. But they feel welcome to learn, to explore, to engage, to think about, well, how might I depict myself if I were given the agency? Or what would I want a portrait to look like of me? Who are some of the important people in my life and how might I depict them? It's all of these things that there's this intellectual and artistic generosity of their practice that is, I think, where we can find that unicorn moment of, like becoming relevant again. But also, I'm really glad that you brought up the nexus of all these things coming together that were right at your institution, because I think so many people in leadership want there to be a silver bullet, something that's going to solve all the problems that can be applied, as a template to other institutions that you can just pick up and say, okay, this is what they did, we're going to do it here. But the community, the collection, the board, the staff, all of those things, and the kinds of projects that you want to do have to be right for that place. And I think we've gotten so far away from that and wanting to try to replicate what other people are doing that's been successful, instead of really having this kind of holistic approach to site specific and place based curatorial and museum practice.
Did you want to tee up another question? Or I would just weigh into just with a couple thoughts that came to mind hearing
Please,
these
go ahead.
brilliant
And then we can
responses. One is just that Ozma narrativized a perfect grant application in her recollection of the Amy Sherald experience, even though it was in hindsight. But the key variable there, that this is rocket science, but all cultural philanthropies want to feel like, and especially at Luce, that they are putting their resources toward impact. And impact is defined in a multitude of ways. Community impact is one of them. Impact with regard to partnerships, especially new partnerships that are sustainable over time. So these are not just one and done. But I also just want to make the point of, and Ozma, I'm right there with you with regard to these projects that have wider appeal, but that does not preclude scholarly and curatorial rigor. That those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Well, thank you to all three of you. And now we have some time for questions, if anybody has questions from the audience. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate the perspectives, Lisa, that you've brought here, especially speaking from an institutional standpoint, a foundation and philanthropic standpoint, and coming, Jamie, it's great to see the diversity of perspective on this question in the funding. And I just want to ask each of you, in this time where the funding requirements are, in some ways you pointed to, you indicated you've got to look in other directions and into each other to some degree to fill gaps. How much consideration is going into another sector, which is the private sector, major industries who may or may not have already devoted funding and programming to support the arts, but they really won't necessarily if they're not asked. So is this on your agenda? And how do we navigate it from each of your perspectives?
Thank you for that question. It's a very thoughtful one. For one, am seeing a lot of challenges on the private side. Corporations, I'll begin with them. First of all, I will just say Baltimore, just the geography of Baltimore it's not Rust Belt, but it is a city that was previously in the top 10 in terms of population and has just been declining ever since. I think now we're in the top 30. So corporations that have created Baltimore's wealth are fleeing. There's some that are staying, like Under Armour, who are newer. But their commitment to the arts is not as robust as their commitment to other issues affecting urban regeneration, such as education, et cetera. So making the case to them is challenging, one. And then I will say the other challenge with corporations is that they are feeling the scrutiny from the administration and what their portfolio of giving is looking like. So I've literally had the heads of bank foundations say to me, do you have any shows that are dealing with Matisse that we can put on our portfolio of giving?
This may not be a direct answer, but one thing that we have also noticed in kind of looking at our budgeting for the next 2 years, we're dealing with some budget cuts and other things like most institutions right now. But after the pandemic, we came back and we didn't stop. We still continued to do virtual programming, and we brought back in-person programming, and we've never found that balance. And I think a lot of our staff, we're having higher rates of burnout with our staff than we ever have. I've been at the Hood for 8 years now. And as much as we try to do less, and I think this is why museum people, as wacky as we are also wonderful, because we wouldn't be in the field if we didn't care deeply, because it's definitely not for the paychecks. So we have this desire to share our excitement and enthusiasm and the joy that art brings us with audiences. But the downside of that is that our institutions tend to overprogram. And so one of the things that I've been saying is this actually, the one silver lining is this is an opportunity for us to reevaluate some of the programming that we're doing and find out what are the meaningful programs that we should stick with, what are maybe some new things that we can introduce, and what maybe isn't serving our needs in this moment, and we can set aside either indefinitely or permanently. And then I'll just say that the other challenge for us is, younger people too. How do we start to cultivate meaningful relationships with young people? And I think a lot of it actually is through, corporate partnerships and other things, but, that gets into, not only the areas you were mentioning, but, once again, being in an academic museum, our students tend to kind of look for, any small thing that anyone has done at any point in their lives as a reason to say they should be canceled. And so I have a lot of conversations with my students about the importance of nuance and complexity and grappling with ambiguity and critical thinking, which I think is just something that we've kind of lost the art of doing. And so, having tough conversations with them about and just being transparent about how budgets work. I will have students say, well, this institution has so much money, they just bought, this multi-million-dollar painting, and they're laying off staff. That to most people who don't know how museum finance works, that seems like a really big problem, and it is. But once they understand that, those are restricted endowments that can only be used for that purpose, and there's legally no other way to use those funds, they're like, oh, well, that sucks, but I guess they couldn't use that money, and it makes sense now. And so I think there's also, back to the relevancy thing that you brought up earlier was, being more transparent about how we're funded, how things come into our institutions. And then another thing that is not foundation, but like deaccessioning it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resources, and we don't do it to make money. But I think storage is one of those, that's like our big project that we've had to put off is, we need expanded storage space. And we were hoping that we could start it next year. And it's probably going to be another 3 years before we can even entertain that conversation now. And so just kind of like realigning priorities, but, trying to figure out like what is mission critical and what is mission driven in this moment. I think finding that North Star, is always so important.
Other questions?
Well, first, I just want to thank you all. I mean, it's wonderful work. You're all superheroes. It's great. And yes. And I want to say, as an artist, you talked about community. And when you're a kid and you're an artist and you don't know any artists, you don't know any community, museums are publicly accessible community of knowledge and expertise. Anyone can go. I mean, like you said, sometimes you don't feel welcome at first, but then you realize, and it's all for me. And it's wonderful. And I just wanted to thank you for doing this work, because there's somebody out there now discovering what you've done, going, oh, I may make that. It'll be the next Amy Sherrill or Carol Romero. I love both those artists, and I'm so glad to see them up there. So thanks.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll take a break or go to the next panel. Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a comment. I was very fortunate to meet with you and other people at the Baltimore Museum of Art. I sold 2 textile pieces by 20th century women artists. And I was amazed at the treatment, the welcome I got there. There were maybe 8 people who came into the room to meet with me, and they spent, including you, and they spent over an hour with me and were so gracious. I saw the Amy Sherrill show. The Baltimore Museum of Art is doing a superb job of welcoming people. As soon as you walk in, you're greeted. People are coming up to you, offering to help you find what you're looking for, engaging you in conversation in the galleries. The Delaware Art Museum does a great job of this as well. The Art Institute of Chicago. There's still many museums that have the old-fashioned, elite, white, WASP, hallowed halls. And that has to go. That really has to go. So I haven't been to Minneapolis. I'm hoping that when I do go to other museums, I have the same experience. I'm a former museum curator, and there's still a lot of work to be done there. And who do you know? Maybe a head of a corporation walks in your doors and takes note of what's going on there. Just a comment, not a question, and a shout out to Baltimore.
That was very kind. Thank you. Please keep us in your prayers. There's a lot of challenges ahead, but that was very kind. Thank you so much.
And the last note, if you do go to the Twin Cities, I'm going to recommend a best kept secret, which is the Minnesota Museum of American Art in St. Paul, downtown St. Paul, which is a wonderful place. It's the only museum of American art that I know of that is headed by an Indigenous woman, Kate Bean. So they're doing great work, and they're like they're like tiny but mighty, and they're the little engine that could. So don't neglect them when you go to the Twin Cities. And they have the biggest collection of George Morrison's work. And I'm not just saying it because of this, but I had the good fortune of reinstalling their collection, and there's a George Morrison room, and only they could really do that. So, and they could even rotate it and have a whole set of new things. So it's a gem, and I don't think people really know about it. So thank you everybody for your good questions, and thank you to my panelists.